This is my capacity that I have, and this is what I'm going to commit to doing. And for me, just making a mental commitment of like, I'm going to see this through. And I did that with one friend who was entering into a just years-long battle, roller coaster scenario of cancer, but injury, and then cancer and all the things. And the beginning said to myself, once again, duty of care. She is my friend. I'm going to see this through, whether she's healed or I walk her to the grave.
Okay, welcome everybody to In the Blink, and I want to welcome my friend Gina Holtkamp. She was a big part of my caregiving team when life imploded. As I like to say.
Which one?
Which part? Parts 1 and 2.
Okay.
Never too soon. And I feel like you just stepped into that role pretty seamlessly, and it seemed like it just came very naturally to you. In fact, I totally remember when Bob first went into the hospital and you came to the hospital. I honestly can't even remember what you were bringing, but you seemed to understand the severity of the situation almost before I did. And I think maybe understood it a lot more than the people around us. Even I think you were like, hey, everybody wake up. We've got a crisis on our hands. Do you know what do you remember?
I remember that day. I remember it was hard as somebody who likes to jump into the moment of crisis and help out and be there for people when I know they need help and not really have access. Mm-hmm. So it was during COVID, it was a super strange time. And I remember thinking, okay, I can't do what I normally do, but which we'll talk about capacity a lot in this discussion. But I remember thinking, well, I'm going to drop off a meal and give her a hug. And then after that, I went and sat in the chapel. And, that's one of a caregiving option and way. And I knew that for me, it was a really special moment because I knew I couldn't do anything else.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it was still something super important in a way that I could participate. And so I still remember that chapel and sitting there and thinking, where is this going?
Yeah.
And sitting with that fear right then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So fast forward, then Gina and I have been talking about the role of caregiving when trauma occurs and the importance of having compassion for yourself during that time, but then also the role that suffering plays in our lives and how it can be actually a transformative and beautiful experience. So we thought this would make a great podcast topic because it's not often explored. So many times we talk about the people that experience the trauma, but not necessarily the caregiving team behind the survival of that person, really.
And I think that when I came to this realization, I was actually listening to some of your podcasts and was hearing these stories of, intense trauma but also the stories of healing and resilience. And I was like, wait a minute, I have a similar perspective, but from the other side of the bed, if you will.
Yeah.
Like as a person who has held the hand of the patient, I haven't been in that spot yet. I'm sure at some point I will be, but as a person who has given care in a few different situations, I realized that we have similarities to the patient as a caregiver. We do experience trauma that needs to be acknowledged in order to come out of these scenarios in a healthy way. And then we also have stories of healing and transformation because it doesn't just affect the patient. It does affect our hearts. We are transformed in our moments of compassion. Our families can be transformed in these moments by witnessing a level of compassion. And so as I was listening to your podcast, I was like, oh gosh, my story is similar from a caregiving perspective and in trauma and healing, just as it is with a patient who's experiencing the real trauma.
Right. How did you find yourself in these roles?
Well, it's unique because you're on both sides of this time too, as not just a patient, as someone who has given care as well. And I think you can share more about care as being thrust into it because you're a family member. The way that I think I got into it is really friends who have been in dire need and stepping back as a friend and critically thinking, if I call myself a friend to this person, what is the duty of care? Like, what are my responsibilities of providing and what can I do or how should I enter into these situations? So the more scenarios that I participated in, I think the more intentional I've gotten, which is important to share in this because I've not always done it in a healthy way. And often people do experience burnout. For me, it's been a season of care. And I just think about all the people who are providing care for loved ones over their entire lifetime.
Right.
And so a caregiver's health is an important topic through this.
Yeah.
But maybe you can share too, because you have this experience of also the way that you provided care.
Yes. I would say, and I probably did not go about it in a very healthy way. And in retrospect, I don't think there's anything else I could have done differently. I felt a true panic, like I was watching a light kind of slip through my fingers. And I don't quite have the words to articulate what was happening, except for it just felt like I was in a constant state of fight or flight, or I was having a constant panic attack. And I had to be there. I felt like his life depended on my presence and my attention and my understanding of what was happening behind the scenes. Like I was really his only advocate. Mm-hmm. And I think because it was COVID and he eventually was moved into the ICU and then was on a ventilator and he couldn't speak for himself, I think it just, became a mission. And my therapist will say it was like I kind of rose to my higher self. Like it was like all my brain power went into saving his life. And so I became so obsessed with what was happening there, I really couldn't focus on anything else. And it was such an intense and acute period. I don't know if
it was weeks, right?
It was weeks. It was
months.
It was 2 months.
Right.
So it's, different from somebody who maybe is living with somebody who's sick and they're still participating in everyday life. It's sort of interesting how those, it can be a little bit less acute and still probably extremely taxing.
But when you're in the middle of it, it does feel all-consuming.
All-consuming.
And so I think what you're pointing to is really trauma. And if I had to look back and seeing you, I remember coming over to your house a few times in the middle of that and thinking to myself, she's in shock right now. She looks like she's in a state of shock. And I know what she's entering into every day is trauma inducing. And so when you were outside of that, your friends were probably seeing you as glazed over and really almost despondent is probably a word that, and I remember talking to a friend, like, I'm really worried about her. I think she's like despondent. She's in constant state of shock of what's the reality that she's living in. Knowing as a friend that that's creating trauma that you have to deal with. And so I think it's an important discussion in talking about caregiving as its own as a trauma-inducing experience, because it really is. Yes, not taking anything away from the patient, obviously, who's experiencing that, who's laying in this hospital bed or living this daily nightmare of some sort of injury or illness. But at the same time, it is so hard to hold the hand of a loved one and have all that intense worry and responsibilities of carrying the weight of their life and maybe your own life at the same time. Yeah. And so I think to acknowledge that is to be able to deal with that and to not necessarily do it well because you are in crisis, you are existing, but maybe acknowledging that there are steps that you can maybe do a little bit better and then for sure take care of yourself and heal afterwards.
Yeah, that's probably a crucial step. And I think we talked about this earlier. I had remembered a doctor saying to me, and we thought that Bob was coming home, you guys are going to have a lot of PTSD when you get home. And I thought, why would we have that?
Right.
We're going to be home and
healed and happy.
We're just be thrilled that
right.
He's alive and our lives are moving forward. And I just remember thinking like, that's not registering with me at all. And then it's kind of haunted me in the years since. And then he did pass away. But I actually think of them as two separate traumas. The trauma of what was witnessed in the hospital as a caregiver and then the trauma of his death. And I've sometimes wondered if actually that trauma of being the caregiver there was a bigger trauma in a way.
Right. And probably because, when someone does pass, there is closure. You grieve, you celebrate, you heal in some capacity. And I think with a trauma, if it's not identified and dealt with, it continues to exist and you are living in a state of trauma. And I can say that in several things that are suffering experiences that I've participated in as a caregiver, I've not done it well. And I've existed in this state of trauma and it whammied me almost a year later where I realized, wow, at the anniversary of Bob's death, the anniversary of another friend's death, I had not really dealt with I I had dealt with losing them, but I hadn't dealt with the experience of what I saw, what I felt, what I heard, the people's lives that I interacted with during that time, and the heaviness of the entire event. And so because I'd done it wrong and didn't really deal with the trauma, and it did nanny me, I've been a little bit more thoughtful about how to process that. And I think, really, when you think about trauma, we're talking about suffering. And I think it's really important to think about suffering is a universal truth. And I think it's important for everyone to acknowledge that we all are going to be a caregiver.
Yeah.
Like, we cannot escape suffering around us, suffering from ourselves in some capacity. And when you think about it like that, I think it creates this universal truth that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
Because it's inescapable.
Right. And along with that suffering can come, I don't know, like some blessings, revelations.
Absolutely.
Transformations.
Absolutely.
And so, although maybe not everybody always wants to look at that suffering, there are gifts to it.
Right. When you talk about suffering as a universal truth, I love the example of a hospital.
Yeah.
And I have to share this because it really helped me think about the collective suffering that we have experienced as society. But if you think of a hospital being an example, you walk in through the front doors of a hospital and you're thrust into an emergency room. There's no greater collective trauma than an emergency room. There, literally every single person is there, what could be a life or death experience.
Right.
I would think that most people have been in that scenario. You go to the first floor, up the elevator to the first floor, to the mother baby unit. And while, yes, it often brings great joy, I've been on that floor when it is the opposite by hand, whether that's bringing home a baby that's going to require care for the rest of their life, or you don't bring home a baby at all. The next floor, the third floor, you can kind of metaphorically consider this maybe the chronic care unit or cancer unit, where these people, whether as a patient or a caregiver, are there day after day or living there for months on time because of a chronic care situation. And then, the top four, metaphorically, palliative care, where you're either there to pass away or you're there to visit somebody and say your goodbyes. And so I think we can kind of all visualize that every single person around us is going to experience that in some capacity. And so to understand that and understand the trauma, whether you're a visitor or a patient, no matter what level or floor that you're on, it kind of gives it some perspective of we all have to deal with this. And to your point of healing, the more that you can process and go through this in a healthy way, the more capable you are of healing and being in a healthy spot through it or after it.
Yeah.
If you have that luck.
Do you have tips on how to process
Yeah, I think
the trauma that you've maybe experienced as a caregiver?
yes. I think you reduce trauma by moving through all of these steps in a healthy way. And I think I started, after knowing I didn't do it in a correct way, I started with the next scenario of being like, okay, first and foremost, I have to only give what I'm capable of giving. So I'm talking about capacity. And for instance, and I know what I'm good at. And I know that for me, it's entering into a crisis situation, or I also can drawn to end of life.
Yeah.
And sitting in that space. Others, I know our friend Danielle is an amazing provider. Like she brings food and she cares and loves in that way. That will never be me. I will not provide you one meal, but I still love you. I'll dash you the meal. See? Stick with what we're good at. I have a friend, Katie, who has the gift of praying. And she intercedes. It's called a prayer of intercession. And she's amazing at what she does. She will walk in and you don't have to ask her a prayer. She's going to give you an amazing prayer and do whether she's there in the room or not. But so, some people are great at medical issues and just sitting with a doctor and really hashing out and understanding it. Some people are great at paperwork and dealing with Medicare, Medicaid, insurance. The whole back bureaucracy of this medical system that we have to deal with. There's just so many different layers of care. I remember for your post-eye injury, and there's a line of 50 people at the door. Everyone was just ready to care, which is awesome. However, it was a mobilized force. while you think I was around a lot, I wasn't, because I really wasn't needed. There was somebody who organized everybody. There was a carrying bridge. There was a meal train. There was somebody to pick up Bo. There was all of these different levels of care. So there was an organizer behind it, just mobilizing people to get everyone. So my point being, starting with capacity is important because I think it enables you to give where you're already good and gifted at, and to not put yourself in a situation where you're overdoing it.
You're in over your head and you're doing it by yourself.
Yes.
Which could be very lonely, I would think, if you're just the only witness to something. I guess that's maybe how I felt.
You did it. You had to do it.
And I had to do it by myself.
No one else was allowed in the hospital.
Nobody else was allowed. It was kind of like his suffering was done in a vacuum.
Right.
Which is a whole nother topic probably. But I could see that if you're the only person that's taking care of somebody,
it's burnout.
It's major burnout, and you could be very lonely.
Yeah. And also thinking about coming out of this in a healthy way, and friendships.
Yeah.
If you have given beyond your capacity,
you're going to be resentful, right?
I think I've seen that in every single scenario where friendships had not lasted through the tragic experience because a friend feels burnt out and they don't know how to re-enter a friendship. And there's some sort of reciprocation. Maybe that's expected. There's just unhealthiness there for sure.
Yeah.
So entering it with the right capacity is really important. I think I would advise people to also communicate that capacity. I think as somebody who's in the dire straits and needs all the help in the entire world, and they're going to, often take what they can. But I've been in a scenario where I'm like, I've got this fire going on over here and I want to be here for you. So let me communicate which ways I'm going to participate.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do this, this, and this. I know there's a lot of gaps in that care. I'm going to help you fill in those gaps.
Yeah.
Let's make sure you're cared for. I just know that I can't provide all the care for you.
Yeah.
So it's okay to communicate where you're at so that those expectations are not you sitting around waiting for a meal that I'm never going to bring you.
Right.
So meeting expectations of capacity of care, I think, is really the best place to start.
Yeah. And fair for everybody, right? Because the person who's sick or needs your help doesn't want at the end of the day for you to be resentful and not the friend, right? Everybody wants the same thing when all is said and done. And hopefully you're closer than you were before. I mean, that would be it. There's an opportunity there too, right? To become even closer.
Absolutely. There's no greater blessing really than to show up for your friends. It's done just going up to lunch and having the best of just times. But that's the authenticity of life.
Yeah.
And for me to express compassion in that way, it does bless me. It does change my heart. And so I receive while giving the gift of caregiving for sure.
Yeah.
Another dynamic to mention too in starting off caregiving in a good way, I think, is also really to acknowledge that the caregiver needs their own system of support.
Yeah.
And what I have been blessed with is, a supportive family at home. And so very often, and hopefully a little bit more intentionally is, hey, I'm called to do this. I need to be here. But what that means at home is that, my husband's, filling in for me where I'm missing, and he's amazing at doing that, and letting my kids know I'm going to be missing in action because my friend is in dire need.
Right.
And which I think is a gift to my family because it allows them to participate in a compassionate caregiving experience. It allows my children to see what does compassion really look like.
Right.
And participate in that in healthy, age-appropriate ways, right? Not entering hopefully into the depths of the trauma, but seeing that life is not perfect and that we all have to do this.
Yeah.
And seeing by role model, this is how
we show up for people.
Dad, here's how they do this. Yeah. So, acknowledging that it's my participation and capacity is also based off of the support system that I have.
Totally. And there might be sacrifices, right? There's sacrifices to your time.
Absolutely.
You're maybe not at their games. Dinner's not on the table.
Right.
Yes. But there's short-term sacrifices for this kind of long-term gain of really seeing what compassion and friendship and love is all about. And that's what makes life worth living, right?
Absolutely. And for me, a big part of my life is my faith.
Yeah.
And so compassion is the way I express my faith or show my faith or do my faith, if you will.
Yeah.
And so, to me, to have that ability or that opportunity to show compassion and to show my children, this is how I do my faith, it's a fabulous opportunity. And I can't separate the two. Now, I will say that I know a ton of people who don't have faith, but are very compassionate people.
Yeah.
For me, I don't separate the two. It is core to who I am and how I do it.
Yeah.
So, if you will.
I love that. Mm-hmm. So how would you describe being an intentional caregiver and going into that next phase of intentional caregiving?
So after capacity and kind of really identifying what you're able to get, I think it's really important to step back and be in a good mental state.
Yeah.
And I think starting off with healthy intentions and knowing where you want to end up is invaluable. And what I mean about that is when you're going into an experience, you're just going to be giving, and it's going to be sometimes all-consuming, you're trauma-inducing, all of these things. I know that I mentally have to be like, okay, this is what I'm going to give, and really make a commitment. And I think that's where a lot of people have a hard time about caregiving, is the commitment piece, because I think it's intuitive. Like, people feel that it's going to last forever.
Yeah.
And they don't want to let themselves down. They don't want to let their friend down or their family member down. And so there's a lot of guilt surrounding caregiving because you just don't feel like you're ever doing a done enough job, right?
Yeah.
And like the outcome is somehow dependent on the level of care that you're getting. There's all sorts of layers to that. But I think what I've learned is to go into it in an intentional mindset of being, this is my family member or this is my friend. This is their needs. And I'm going to be really honest with the level of care that is needed. This is my capacity that I have, and this is what I'm going to commit to doing. And for me, just making a mental commitment of like, I'm going to see this through. And I did that with one friend who was entering into a just years-long battle, roller coaster scenario of cancer, but injury, and then cancer and all the things. And the beginning said to myself, once again, duty of care. She is my friend. I'm going to see this through, whether she's healed or I walk her to the grave. And so I just made a commitment to myself and mentally that that's how I was going to participate. And I had to step out at certain times to regain healthiness and balance in life. But I think that acknowledging your level of commitment is super important. And I think that you have to go into caregiving not expecting one darn thing.
Yeah.
And I think you have to repeat that to yourself. And if you're going into it for any other reason other than to show compassion, you're going to get burned.
Yeah.
It's not the patient's responsibility to ever repay you. And as a patient, you can't do that, right? You can't ever repay somebody for the hours and that they spend away from their own families and all these things, right? I know you held quite a bit of, I wouldn't say guilt, but you're like, I remember having this discussion with you of how do you repay or honor these people and what they've given and sacrificed.
Absolutely. I still worry about that. I think the party we threw, I think I was like, I want to throw a party. I want to thank everybody for everything they have done. I still don't know. It really was meant to say thank you to everyone. But it's still hard to.
I think it's repay. Yeah. It's human nature to be like, you did this, so I need to do exactly this back. And that's the hard part of receiving this gift, but it is a gift.
Yeah.
And so for me, as somebody who has held the hand of several friends going through really hard times, the greatest gift that I can receive back is their healing.
Yeah.
Is a celebration. It hasn't always ended in a celebration where that person is alive, unfortunately. But it is that in itself should be the only thing that I hope and expect in return is some sort of either healing or celebration.
Right.
And so there's actually a quote by Jay Shetty that he shared about Jay Shetty. And I think, what a compassionate person. And I think what I loved about this quote, and I'll share it with you, is it really highlights how to go into this in healthy situation. And it's really less for the caregiver and more for the patient to hear.
Yeah.
And I think it's important because you have to release as a patient, you have to release a certain amount of guilt and control over how other people participate or are healthy or unhealthy in these scenarios. And so let me just read it. And I think it kind of highlights what's required of people to participate in caregiving. Jay Shetty says, fake friends remember what you owe. Real friends forget what they give. Fake friends keep score. Real friends lose count. Fake friends hand you favors with strings attached. Real friends give without conditions. Fake friends treat kindness like currency. Real friends treat kindness like breeding. Fake friends loan support to be repaid. Real friends invest love with no return expected. Fake friends give to gain. Real friends give to grow. And I just love that lesson. A real friend, and thinking about this as participating in a friendship to the highest level possible is ultimately, investing in a friendship because you want it to grow and you want to be there for your friend or your family member. Yeah. So I just love how it kind of summarized the health and unhealthiness. Once again, not the patient's responsibility. Right. But I think it's great perspective to be like, are they expecting something from me? Like, do I feel obligated? Because that's your first sign that it's unhealthy.
Yeah.
And they're participating based on an unhealthy perspective.
Right. And as the patient, you're in crisis, so you're not really thankful for the help. So there's probably not a ton on your end that you can vet. You know what I mean? You're just kind of grateful for who shows up.
And let me ask you this, as from a patient perspective, were you confused by people who, after you did heal, suddenly disappeared?
That's a really interesting question. What's funny is no. I don't feel that way, really. But I do feel like a little bit of guilt, like they showed up and maybe I haven't repaid them properly or I haven't seen them since.
So the reason for them disappearing was because you did something wrong.
That's what I think. Okay. Yeah. So I overall, and I think this was part of my healing journey, was I decided to just harness all the love in the moment and try to put aside any of the guilt, because that's kind of my go-to. But I was like, I'm just going to harness all this love and I'm going to meditate on it and I'm going to try to embody it. And I really think it helped me heal. And I only look back really with a lot of love and gratefulness to everybody that showed up. And I do wonder, like, gosh, did I thank them properly?
That you did. I will reiterate those again.
Some days, there were people that showed up that I hadn't seen much in the years prior. Maybe they had been a good friend at a certain time in my life.
Right.
And they reappeared during this time. And then I haven't really seen them since. And some of those people didn't see me on great days. I was maybe in a terrible state, or I was in tears, or I was angry. And I do carry some shame about that.
I think it's just hard because you're trying to manage somebody else's emotions and how they receive you at your worst possible time too, which is impossible to do. So I think that's important for me to say. And I wish I could alleviate that concern for so many patients who go through these life-altering experiences and have caregivers surrounding them, and just say it's not your responsibility. And a simple thank you and celebration should be all it requires. And there's no greater gift that we can receive than your health in a return to health. So that was plenty. You're absolved that guilt.
Well, that side of genius went out, I don't know, far and wide, so people came that I didn't have.
That was amazing.
It was amazing. And, I've talked about this a lot, that was this, that was really the birth of In the Blink. And, from suffering and loss can come great abundance. And, that holds true for caregiving, all the aspects that come out of something like a trauma or an accident or a death, there could be great abundance in all of it.
Right. I love that so many people participated in whatever capacity. Yeah. Maybe that's all they were able to participate and handle at that time. And they did. They still showed up. Yeah. And I think that is really the most important thing. Is I have felt so much guilt from the caregiver standpoint when I haven't been able to show up, or I've been so overwhelmed, I just didn't show up. Yeah. And I think that I dealt with that by being more intentional, be like, okay, I can't show up in my usual way, but there's still some capacity that I can show up for. Sending a card or phone call or texting and participating, and I'm thinking of you. Right? I'm not there holding your hand right now, but I'm thinking of you. And when I haven't done that, and I know a friend's going through, that's guilt that from this side of the bed, and it does stay. Yeah, I try to avoid that guilt by participating in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And to the capacity that you have at the time.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a great lesson to all of us as well. And women in general, you know?
Right. Of not extending, yeah. And to the point of emotional burnout. Right. It's not. And that's good.
We've kind of touched on this, but I think an important aspect to all of this is sort of a ritual of closure. And yes, you brought this to my attention that like the elephant celebration we had with the women was like a great moment of closure. Maybe for also my caregivers, I was trying to say thank you, but really it was kind of saying I'm okay now.
Right.
And closure for them as well.
Right.
Whereas like a celebration of life is closure for that event. But the importance of these,
I think, as a whole, and looking at caregiving as intentional, you have the before, the middle, and you have to consider the after. And a big part of that, of not carrying this trauma with us on the daily, and is having an endpoint to and saying, this is now over. Now, it's hard to say that because not everyone gets to live that reality. So people live in this trauma on the daily.
right?
There's no
Clear closure.
and there won't be. I have watched a fabulous documentary called Caregiving, and Bradley Cooper was the executive producer. I highly recommend it because it really gave a perspective of caregiving in the United States and what a crisis we're in.
Yeah.
And while I had the ability to enter into that level of care, and you have family members, really what's going on with an aging population and an increased need of care is this is becoming a massive crisis in our nation where we don't have enough caregivers. And it's not just caregivers for an emergency scenario. These are long-term health caregiving needs. So it's hard to talk about. I want to acknowledge that not everyone gets that endpoint in caregiving, and that is their daily reality, and how hard it is for these caregivers to be underpaid. Most caregivers, professional caregivers, make less than $25,000 a year. That's way below the priority line.
And then how many people are acting as daily caregivers that aren't getting paid at all?
Right. And are we supporting family medical leave acts? Are we supporting all these social programs that are needed to reciprocate somebody who has to leave their job, maybe permanently, to care for a loved one? And so there's a whole other side of caregiving, which I'd like to highlight. And I think this documentary did such a fabulous job of highlighting the depth of compassionate care that happens all around us where we can't see it, and also the national crisis over this is going without the proper resources to caregiving. But to say that and being able and privileged to have closure, which it is, I think it was a gift to be able to celebrate and have that closure. But as someone who's experienced the trauma, I think it's not just about saying, oh, the season is done and now I'm over it. I think, you don't get over a death by just showing up to a funeral, right? You get over a death by truly grieving it and going through whatever those stages look like for you.
Yeah.
And I have not done it well. And so to highlight the need for post-traumatic care.
Yeah.
It really is that. Counseling, to say it and bring it into the light, there's no better thing.
Yeah.
To sit with that heaviness, to not share some of the sights that I've seen, and to have it stuck in my head has really eaten me alive. I know you've seen a lot of stuff that you're like, wow, did I really just see that? Like the depth of suffering and trauma and hurt going on around us. To not release that and let go of it will come back down to you, and your body will keep the score of that trauma.
Right. And there's a book called that.
There is. I might love that book too. But I think to be healthy, we have to process this trauma, release it, and then, the other side of that is celebration. It is, if we've endured the suffering, the other side of suffering is joy.
Yeah.
And so
to experience both of those things.
Yes. What a greater, you are more joyful because you've been through this, right? You get to feel that extreme joy because you've seen the other side and how hard life can be.
Right.
So that is a big part of these life experiences.
Yeah. I think you've highlighted that caregivers might need just as much care, therapy after the experience as the people really living it or in the thick of it. They have their own trauma.
Right.
Having been a witness to.
I think there was a little bit of trepidation, not wanting to say, I'm experiencing trauma too.
Totally.
Right? Like,
Totally.
your friend is in a hospital bed.
Right.
Your friend just lost her eye. Your friend just lost her husband. Right? It's not something
I traumatized everyone around me.
but it's important to acknowledge, because you don't come out of it healthy unless you do. And I think it's not taking anything away from the patient to say, this isn't something I'm going to you, and it's like, excuse me,
I'm having syndrome.
talking about the theory you're trying to do, right? That's not the right form. However, handling it from a caregiver's perspective and processing and doing all these healthy, intentional things to stay healthy or become healthy again is really important. Because it is suffering.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about this as you were talking. We're forever changed from these experiences. So, I'm still processing everything, and maybe will be forever. And I guess the lesson is you don't ever really know, like, oh, I'm healed now.
Right.
You're just basically doing the best you can and hoping that we are healing some of these things, feeling what we need to feel.
I think participating grows your level for capacity, your capacity for compassion.
Yeah.
So watching you, a very compassionate person naturally, your capacity for giving and showing compassion has only grown because you've entered into all of these scenarios.
Excuse me, because sometimes I'm like, I'm tapped out.
Right? You get there. It can be too much. But your heart grew. And I think that's it's like the story of the Grinch's heart, right? It's like, I don't want to participate at all because life is too full of misery and suffering. And then your heart grows a little bit. And I think that's a great analogy for the more that you participate in these compassion experiences, the greater your heart becomes for it. And
that is so beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, mic drop.
Oh, well, so I think it's the gift that you receive back too, is it's hard to enter into. And, let's give that its due credit. But, that's what participating in humanity really, right? Part of being out of it too. Yeah, right? It's like you can't avoid any of these scenarios. Once again, it is a universal human experience. And so the more we can enter in and understand it, the more we're participating in the humanity going on around us, and the more that our heart grows to this compassion.
I love that so much. Thank you so much.
Because you're an entrepreneur. Such an honor.
Yes. Thank you for all of your caregiving and being a compassionate person and example to everybody around us. So it's well friend. Thank you. Love you.
Love you too.